Hi, everyone. My name is Oscar Hernandez. I am the community organizer for Houston Action, and I'm very excited to be here with everyone today. As you all know, we have been planning this session for arts and healing for quite some while, and we're very excited to open the doors and to be able to participate with all of you here today. And as we get moving forward, there's a couple of things we like to cover first. A little bit about how we want to use the space for right now, and I would love to hear from everyone who's on here. If we can introduce ourselves, name, pronouns, organization, and title, and then we have a check-in question, which is name a work of art, whether it be a song, a book, or a movie that you've been going back to for strength in this in inspiration recently. So for me, my name is Oscar Hernandez. As an example, I work with Houston Action. I'm a community organizer, and I've been watching this amazing movie called La Otra Conquista, which is it's actually a really tragic story, but it's really beautifully written about indigenous people in my native land and how colonizing has impacted them. And it's a struggle of one indigenous man in particular, but how he goes through his whole life. It's really helped me cope and think about what we're going and how amazing a lot of our communities are. So if y'all can use the chat portion to share, and please make sure to introduce yourself so we know in the chat portion, and use this as a check-in question for us to talk to each other. And as y'all are writing in, thank you so much, Sandra, for inputting. As y'all are writing in the chat portion and sharing some ideas, I like to go over how we can go over the guidelines for participation in this space. The first thing I want to make sure we all are please muting ourselves in this space so we can have the adequate time and sound to allow the speakers and other our panelists to share in the space. We want to use the chat box for any questions that you have to the panelists. Don't worry, we have Joy, Tanya, and Mario, who are staff members of HIA, who will be reviewing that chat portion, and they will also be making sure that we can ask those questions towards the end when we get to a Q&A portion. But once we are at the Q&A portion, if you can make sure that we keep track of it, there's a raise your hand on the bottom of your Zoom where you can do that so we can keep track of who wants to speak, and we'll be allowing that folks to ask any questions you want. But if you do want to speak, we do ask you to please introduce yourself first, at least say your name in the space so we know who's sharing. And then feel free to turn on the camera. That's a strong encouragement if you're comfortable with it. We love to see all your beautiful faces out here as we talk to people, and it helps us have a more intentional dialogue for what we'll be covering today. So thank you, Jose. Thank you, Tanya, for folks who are using the chat portion. The next thing I want to go over is our working principles. So for those of you, this might be your first time you're joining Houston in Action in one of our trainings or events. The working principles is what we use as a stepping stone for how we move forward and how we want to work with the different organizations that we collaborate with. The working principle that I want to focus on today is everyone has a voice, is respecting every participant's voice and perspective in this space. And that's really what I hope we can do as we listen to our panelists and our amazing facilitator, which we will introduce in a bit through this space. But it's also understanding that all of you, as spending the time with us today, you also have a voice, and we want to recognize that voice in this space. For Houston in Action, a quick plug into the work that we're doing. For right now, we have all of our events on our websites. If you go to houstonaction.org, you can see, thank you for everyone who registered. That would be one of the places where you had come in to register for today's event. But through our work, we do a variety of things. We will not be able to do any of the work that we do if it was not for our member organizations. It's a 50+ nonprofit, different organizations of community members too, who support and build off of our work. And one of the big things for my role as a community organizer is to build different organizing settings and trainings, which include cultural organizing, which our facilitator Andrea, which some of you might reintroduce or we get to meet for the first time, has been a great help in developing it, and then working with other consultants to digital organizing, racial justice, and anti-racism. Our work primarily right now is focused around census, but we are planning on doing much more voter engagement work as we move forward. Excited to be able to participate and encourage our communities to have a full civic life. And our Power to People model is also a process of building leadership development and ensuring that our communities are not only have access to our resources, but are leading a lot of the work. So I'm gonna hand it over to Andrea. And just a quick note, Andrea is an amazing facilitator that we've been working with from Arts2Action. She led a lot of our trainings through the work that we did in February, through one of the trainings that we put together. And she has been an amazing help in working and helping us, guiding through the process of building culture, organizing, and even through developing this panel today. So Andrea, take it away.
Gracias, Oscar. Hello, everyone. Buenos dias. Good to see you all. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Andrea Assaf. I'm the Artistic and Executive Director of Art2Action. I'm zooming in right now from Tampa, Florida. And welcome to my virtual studio here at Art2Action. And I'm always honored and excited to collaborate with Houston in Action. And really, it's an honor to be able to present this panel and this conversation that we're going to have today, which will include both some listening and hearing from our wonderful panelists and also experiencing some practices that they have to offer. And we're going to end with resources for further reading or further work that you want to do. And the intention of this session is to be able to offer some approaches to artistic practice that intersects with healing and community organizing work. And this is really for anyone who is feeling the need for some grounding and healing practices in your own life right now, in the context that we're in, and the crises that we've been living through following the murder of George Floyd. And I want to lift up and acknowledge that many of you are in Houston right now, and the funeral was yesterday in Houston. So I know that Houston is in mourning and emotions are high. And what we hope to do in this session is offer some tools that folks can use both for their own personal practice and in your community work, whether that's organizing work or community-based arts practice, or direct action, whatever it is that you're doing. And we also recognize that this context is further complicated by the pandemic. And when we began planning this session, we actually were planning it in response to the pandemic before the murder of George Floyd. And so we recognize the multiple layers of trauma that people are dealing with, and anxiety, and that and we hope we can support all of you in supporting your communities and your work and your own personal wellness and well-being in this session. So just to tell you a little bit more, as Oscar said, Art2Action has been collaborating in partnership with Houston in Action on cultural organizing, and we shifted this session specifically to address the need for trauma-informed practices and healing in this time. And we will continue doing more offerings around cultural organizing as we go forward. But Art2Action is an organization a nonprofit arts organization that creates and presents original theater, interdisciplinary performance, and progressive cultural organizing. And we explicitly, in our mission, we support Black, Indigenous, and artists of color, women identified and queer and trans identified artists, and creative allies, anyone who is dedicated to cultural equity, community value, and impact. So that's our work, and the purpose of this panel I'm going to introduce you to our wonderful panelists who I'm so thrilled have been able to join us for this. I'm going to say a little bit about each of them, and then they're going to have some time to introduce themselves more deeply. First, and I want to introduce folks by way of not only who they are and what they do, but how Art2Action knows them, how we're connected, and work that we've done together. Intentionally, we selected panelists for this session that have very different approaches to even the word healing, the practices of healing, what healing means and can look like. And we wanted to do that to offer a broad array of doors in and access, and so that you can find the thing that resonates with you in this array of practices that we're going to talk about. So our first panelist, and I'll introduce everybody first and then we'll do the first round of panelist introductions. But our first panelist will be Lanee Green, who is a licensed clinical social worker. And Lanee works in psychosocial rehabilitation and recovery, specifically with US military veterans here in Tampa, Florida. And Lanee and I know each other. We're connected through a multi-year program that Art2Action did with the veteran community and military community in the Tampa Bay area, because that's a very large community that we have here. And we have co-facilitated in the context of clinical work, offering arts-based practices as part of a larger process of therapy and healing. So Lanee will speak from the point of view of a clinical social worker and offer some of her experiences working with arts and culture in that context. And then we'll have Saori Murphy, who is herself a veteran and a visual artist and an intuitive healer. Saori worked with Art2Action as a program coordinator for the project I just spoke about, and a curator for a visual arts exhibit that we did together, and is an incredible artist herself and wonderful facilitator that I've had the opportunity to co-facilitate with many times. And then we'll go to Adelina Anthony. And Adelina, just saying your name makes me smile, because Adelina brings humor and performance work to this intersection of activism and healing and cultural practice and cultural healing. Adelina is a Tejana who is currently based in California. She's an incredible actor and two-spirit theater artist and filmmaker. And we've worked together among many other things. Adelina has served as a faculty member for the National Institute for Directing and Ensemble Creation, which I am a national coordinator for, and is based in Minneapolis. And in fact, we would have been in Minneapolis right now if it weren't for the COVID pandemic. Without further ado, I'm super excited to let these folks tell you a little bit more about who they are and what they do. And so we're going to start with a round of 3 minutes each for each of the panelists to tell us more about their work, their experience with art and culture, and what healing means to them in the perspective that they're bringing to this panel. And we'll start with Lanee.
Thank you, Andrea. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I would like to thank Houston in Action and Art2Action for offering me this opportunity to join in this critical discussion on how trauma-informed practices, healing justice, and how the artistic process can help support your organizing. My professional practice, as Andrea mentioned, is partnering with individuals who have a diagnosis of severe mental illness, major mood disorder, schizophrenia, severe PTSD. And in this partnership, we are helping to facilitate their recovery. We use interventions such as CBT, social skills training, supportive therapy, mindfulness skills, and the arts to aid in their recovery journey. Our performing arts workshop features spoken word, drum circles, creative writing, poetry, and visual arts, all as tools to help progress their recovery and their healing. It's common for individuals to face barriers when trying to identify their purpose or what they would consider to be meaningful life's work. People with SMI are no exception to that process. And just like many of us, they faced traumatic experiences, sometimes complex traumatic experiences that can really further complicate goal setting and life satisfaction. So that's a little bit about what I do in my professional practice. As far as healing, I define healing as reconciliation with all that we are, accepting, honoring, nurturing injuries and strengths while creating space for some new understanding, an alternative to the way that we once viewed the world. So again, I want to thank everyone for allowing me to be here, and I am excited to be a part of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction, Lanee. And we'll hear more in depth about Lanee's work in a few minutes. We're going to go next to Saori.
Hello, everyone. My name is Saori, and it is an honor to be here with you in this moment. I consider myself to be a Uchi Nanchu, which is an Okinawan born. My family lives in a village in Okinawa. I was born there. I grew up in the States, and through my experience and expressions and struggles through my own history, without my family, I started on a journey of healing through the arts as a way of creative expression. I've been working as an artist for over 25 years now. I've been working in the creative healing arts as a facilitator since 2006, working with at-risk youth, even beginning when I was in the US military as active duty. I volunteered my weekends to work with at-risk youth in Denver to work on empowerment and conversation and our inner strength building. Over the years, I've been working with different forms of healing modalities and working with Art2Action back with the veteran population, and also working with family resources. I worked with veterans in incarceration, survivors of sexual trauma, and the Florida Sheriff's Youth Ranch in my community. My work now really involves a lot more of the intuitive energy healing with my creative arts because of my own journey of healing and struggles with identity and mental health challenges. Through that work, I'm now a teacher assistant through the School of Intuitive Studies. I've become a founding member of the National Association of Professional Healers, and I'm also a member of the National Initiative for Arts and Health in the Military. Through all of my experiences, as I reflect on what healing is a journey, is a process of being in process, a continued process. It's honoring where I am in each minute and every moment. And as my healing progresses, I'm able to reflect on the tapestry of my life and notice when healing has occurred by the way that I'm being affected by it now, the tools that I have now, and how I'm able to support my communities with these tools and hold space for not only myself, but also for others. And I just want to come back to say thank you so much. This is such an honor to be present with you now. And I'm so glad that you're here joining with us in these very important conversations in this space. Thank you.
Thank you, Saori. Now we'll have an introduction from Adelina.
Hola, hi everyone. I want to start off by saying thank you for having me here. I'm a guest on Tongva lands out here in California, but I am from Texas, San Antonio, where the Payaya peoples were some of the first indigenous peoples. Do not learn history in Texas. I am grateful as a Two-Spirit theater artist for all of the teachers that I've had. We did a tech run. I just want everyone to know that, but I keep getting a little flash that the internet is unstable. So if I pop on and off, it's not my magic tricks, but I'll figure out how to get back on. And I want to thank Andrea for the invitation because this moment is unprecedented in many ways, but not unexpected for those of us who have been working in the name of our communities and our peoples. And so this invitation to just offer up tools and practices is really meaningful. I know that I am alive today because of the artistic and spiritual tools that I have been given along the way. So anything that helps another fellow sibling in this is an honor. One of the things that I'm going to talk about is critical comedy and how we use humor as medicina in our own communities. And I think the best way to do it is mature language in Spanish, so if you have children, it may not be appropriate for them. But I'll just give you a sampling of one of many characters and how I work within my own cultura to reclaim traumatic events or notions, and then I'll speak to that more later in my session. So we can play this expert, Andrea. Thank you all so much.
All right, looks like we're having some sound difficulty. I think you have to select sound through share screen advanced.
I have to do that?
No, Oscar or whoever is running video.
I was like, oh no, I forgot this monologue already, or I would reenact it.
So maybe we'll
we could put it back in. I think it's the Mac that's having an issue with the Zoom. But I'll figure it out, and maybe towards the end we could put it back. So.
Thank you, Oscar. Adelina, did you want to add anything? We'll come back to the video when it's ready. But do you want to add anything before we go into round two? Or
Sure. I think some folks might be familiar with La Chismosa. She's one of three of Las Hociconas, and Las Hociconas is a testament to how I made sense of these really intense years and periods, including my entire childhood life. But it was a way to center so many of our mothers of color and the intense issues that they go through in a comedic way, while still honoring them and playing with it. And they're all hyperboles, but I think in these moments, what I'm clear about as someone who uses comedy is I'm not necessarily using comedy right now because so many of us need to just survive. And if you're going to use comedy critically, usually you have to come out of something to be able to reflect and then be subversive with it. But entre nos, I do think that humor, whenever we can find it, is so important. The intentional joy in our lives that we find during this time, critical. So I'll speak to that more later.
Thank you. So just for folks who are on the call, we want this session to be a mix of talking and sharing ideas and examples and resources, but also some practices and experiences. So we're gonna do one of those before we go into the next round of a hearing from the panelists. Adelina is gonna lead us through a little bit of grounding. And so we ask you to, you know, get comfortable, maybe have your feet on the ground, make sure you have some space around you, and Adelina is going to lead us through a grounding exercise.
So again, I just want to, with all the panelists here, echo the time that we're in. Something that we do as theater artists constantly is find ways to stay connected to our breath and our bodies. So in a state in our lives where I can't breathe has become the banner to our Black Lives Matter resistance. This is an exercise. Many of you have probably done this kind of ground before with your breath, but I am going to add one element to it because I too come from an organizing background. And one of the things that I know about the heart of organizers, one is that organizing is such a creative act because it's about changing the world. And if that's not the most creative act, I don't know what is. You can close your eyes if this makes you more comfortable, or you can just, I always prefer closing your one's eyes. And I'm gonna ask everyone to take a deep breath and to put your hands actually on your belly. And here's why. So if you take a deep breath now, everyone together on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. Hold it and release. Here's the reason I asked you to place your hands on your belly. Many of us, when we take a deep breath, we'll take a deep breath and what rises is our chest. So actually that is a limited way of taking breath because it's only filling the lungs at the top half. When you watch a little baby, babies breathe with their whole bodies. We come into this world knowing how to breathe. So we have to actually retrain ourselves to breathe as deeply as possible from the diaphragm of our belly. So what that looks like, again, close your eyes, and if you have children next to you, they probably know how to. And when you take a deep breath, your goal is to fill your belly as if it was a balloon. So you take a deep breath, and you should feel like a beautiful pregnant woman. Hold it, and slowly release. And as you're releasing, your diaphragm is pushing back in to your back, and the air is coming all the way deep down from your belly. So let's do it one more time to just make sure. It takes a couple of times if we're not used to consciously taking our breath that way. So one more time, you're going to fill it up like a beautiful pregnant woman, and deep breath. Hold it. Feel your feet on the ground and slowly release. Here's the element that I invite you to add. We can use our breath to help us visualize the changes we want to affect in life. So when you take your deep breath this time, this is an offering now. The deep breath calms your body. When you exhale, as performers, as actors, we use verbs. We put things into action. So you can dismantle a local problematic police station. You can use your breath to ennoble your sister, brother, sibling fighting with you, next to you. You can use your breath to embolden your relative. You can use your breath in an active way and imagine this. So I may also use my breath to calm a person down. So pick a verb and then visualize an action with your breath being pushed. So you can do this on your own. You don't have to tell us. So close your eyes and take a deep breath. Hold it. You use that verb, visualize, and if you do this practice, I learned this years ago as an organizer, sometimes we don't give ourselves permission to begin with taking care of ourselves. And what happens is that nature in us to take care of others, to affect change, is an easier way to begin the practice of breath as grounding. So I hope that slight reframing helps and gives you permission to say, my breath is powerful, my breath is mine, breath is.
Thank you, Adelina. Thank you for that moment. We're gonna have some other exercises and practices as we go throughout the panel. And I just wanna say that, you know, I'm very much of the belief, as Audre Lorde talked about, that art is not a luxury. I feel that as a young person who was living in an environment with a lot of violence around me, and I didn't have, you know, therapy was not a thing that I had access to, that theater actually saved my life. I think quite literally, because I had peers who didn't make it. And artistic practice is what pulled me through to be able to move forward in my life. And those breath exercises, grounding exercises, reminders to take care of ourselves are so important in this time, because if we're not taking care of ourselves, we can't take care of each other and move the movement forward. So with that, thank you, Adelina, for leading us through that breath work. And we're going to go back to Lanee in our second round of the panel to hear more deeply about her work. And what I've asked panelists to do in the second round is to you know, go a little deeper in how they work, including possibly stories or examples of projects, and share with us some practices or tools that participants can use going forward. So Lanee, look forward to hearing more from you.
Thank you. I kind of want to go right back to some of the statements that Adelina made about self-care during this process, through any process. We know that activism by definition is action. It's mobilization, it's doing. In contrast to that concept or to that reality, some of our most enlightening work is created by just being. And when we think about activism, political, social movement, we realize that emotions inspire the movements, right? They are the lifeblood of a lot of the activism. But it's important to understand how not managing or taking care of our own emotions can sometimes impact the work we do and impact the people who we are. And I'll talk a little bit, I'll sprinkle some work in my professional practice, but I kind of just wanted to go along with the idea, with the concept of making sure that self-care is a priority for individuals in this line of work. You're often responding to an identified need with action. That's an important skill. It's an instrumental skill. It's a talent. And it's definitely what makes you unique. But the question is, what happens when you, the identified individual who's responsible for responding to others' needs, you fail to respond to your own needs? Naturally, we avoid painful thoughts and experiences and emotions and memories because they hurt. We learn at a young age, don't put your hand in the fire because it will burn. So we apply that same process to our external experiences, things that make us sad or hurt or unhappy or uncomfortable. We tend to suppress or avoid. In the long run, what happens? What happens when we suppress or avoid? Well, we create more distress. We sometimes explode, or that dam, it burst. Our life shrinks. Our worlds become smaller because now a concept which they've termed as experiential avoidance. Now we are trying to avoid these negative experiences by staying away from things that trigger these emotions, these thoughts, and these feelings. So we end up connecting less, doing less. And ultimately, our attempt to control our pain or to avoid these negative experiences creates more suffering. So how do we change this pattern of avoidance? Well, an alternative to that, the alternative to control and avoidance is acceptance. Many times when individuals come into our clinic, they are hopeless. They have experienced so much trauma and have limited social connections to the point where they really don't see life any other way. They don't see another form of existence. And so what we found in many of those instances is that sometimes traditional approaches or evidence-based practices such as CBT, it's too much. It's too much too soon. Finding hope, there isn't one road or one way in. And that's where the performing arts workshop and where arts as a whole come into play. We now actually have an art therapist who comes to the clinic once a week. And participants create, they paint, they draw, they speak, they write. And I'm thinking about one individual in particular who was diagnosed with a disorder that disrupted her functioning, obsessive compulsive disorder and major depression at a very young age. When she came into the clinic, she had difficulty using her voice, sharing. She had difficulty discussing or even creating or developing a plan for what she wanted her life to look like. And so she started to come into the workshop and participate in the creative writing prompts. And the prompts varied. They were sometimes very short exercises, creative writing, not always autobiographical or specifically directed towards personal experiences. But through this process, we began to see another part of this client, another part of this individual who now had the strength and the ability to participate in more complex treatment methodologies. So that's just one small short example of how art sometimes can aid in the recovery process where the evidence-based practice may fall short or may not be appropriate at that moment. So back to the acceptance. This is the alternative to avoidance. Back to acceptance. What do we mean when we say acceptance? What are you accepting? This is an active process, the process of feeling what you feel, thinking what you think, remembering what you remember, and sensing what you sense. Acceptance involves willingness. And I can't imagine, being that I am not an activist, that there may be times where feeling all that you feel and thinking all that you think could possibly get in the way of the task at hand. It could possibly become challenging when you have so many other things to think about. So I do understand that there's a time and a place to practice these activities or these exercises. I just want to emphasize the importance of coming back home, coming back to self, and allowing yourself to live on life's terms. Accepting the pain and creating the space for your own pain, right? To limit your own suffering. So I have an activity, and I'll only, for the sake of time, I haven't done a good job of keeping up with the time, Andrea, so you have to, okay. So the activity asks that you take 3 minutes Okay, so I'll take 2 minutes. So it's recommended that you take about 5 minutes on your own. But just for the sake of this, it'll take about 2 minutes just to quietly reflect. The activity is called cubbyholing. And this is a way to cultivate acceptance of your thoughts, your feelings, and your memories simply by labeling them for what they are without becoming stuck to or wrapped up in the experience. So if you feel comfortable right now, you can just close your eyes. I'm just going to do a really quick walkthrough so that I can familiarize you with the activity, and you can take this away and do this on your own time. Close your eyes if you feel comfortable, or find some place to kind of softly fix your gaze. And what I'd like you to do is begin to notice the thoughts, the sensations, and the feelings. And when a feeling or a thought or sensation comes up, here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to label, such as, I am having the thought that I am not strong enough. I am experiencing the bodily sensation that my chest is tightening. Or I am having the memory of my experience when I left a difficult situation. So during the 2 minutes of reflection, I would like you to use that to categorize your thoughts. So we'll begin now. Okay. I'm going to ask everyone now to bring their awareness back to the group. Again, I do want to apologize if this was a very abbreviated example of the exercise, but I will be hanging around later on if there are questions about the activity. Ultimately, again, this is just one way to cultivate acceptance of our thoughts and feelings and experiences. And I look forward to answering any questions as we move through this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Lanee. That practice of witnessing without judgment, what passes through our minds is so important. And it connects to something that I wanted to mention earlier, which is a lot of our communities of color especially, and also, you know, in US culture, sometimes there's a lot of stigma and taboo around talking about mental health or talking about challenges, especially when we're in leadership and we feel like we can't show weakness, or we can't show you know, that we're struggling with something emotionally when we're trying to organize or lead. And one of the things that I learned from working with Lname and Rachel Brink and a bunch of other folks who were at the PRRC, which is the Psychosocial Rehabilitation and Recovery Center, is that you know, trauma doesn't necessarily kill people, but stigma does. And it's so important that we work through letting go of that stigma and taboo around talking about mental health and being able to witness our experiences without judgment in the way that Lname just modeled. And I also want to lift up quickly what she said about finding hope and the role of the arts in finding hope. I've worked with a lot of different communities who have really high levels of trauma, including one time when I was working with women who'd been through refugee relocation to the United States. And a woman in that group told a story about how she had been in a refugee camp for so many years, in which her only hope, her only goal was to come to the United States. And when she came here, she was, you know, she had moved from East Africa to Massachusetts. She didn't have money or work. She was struggling with language acquisition. She was facing some real hardship. And what she expressed was that she didn't know what to hope for anymore. And through the process of the creative process that we did together as a community, she started to find hope again, meaning she started to find a vision for the future and inspiration and belief that she could reach it. And so I really appreciate, Lname, what you were saying about the role of the arts in inspiring hope and practicing the practice of being able to hope and vision. So with that, we'll go to our next speaker, Saori Murphy.
I would love to piggyback all of that and what Adelina expressed, just a personal note of the stigma and not going to receive help as a veteran. I stayed in my home for a year with agoraphobia because I was a non-combat veteran. And how stigma just in that role, I didn't feel worthy enough to speak up or do anything about it. After that year, I knew I needed to control my breath with panic attacks. And speaking of what Adelina spoke to, and also Andrea, I started to draw lines. I went back to my roots of art, and I took a pen and controlled my breath with a single line and did it over and over and over again until I started connecting to something deeper within myself, deeper in the core of myself and my inner knowing, my inner strength, my inner resilience, which allowed me to continue my healing journey and step out of my door. I just wanted to speak that and the power of creativity and the debilitation of stigma and how strong it can be. I really wanted to speak to also what Lname was speaking to about emotions and how we are all feeling emotions at different varying degrees, and we're feeling a spectrum. And I want to acknowledge that we all have a spectrum of emotions, but what we were taught was what was appropriate to express and what wasn't appropriate or acceptable to express. And in that spectrum, we learned how to suppress. We learned what was okay, what wasn't okay from very, very young ages, maybe even pre-verbal, being hushed when we were crying as a child, depending on what our experiences are. So I wanted to speak about that, and also how those bits of time, those times when that suppression occurs, how it's information that could be stored in our physical body. And in our physical body, we store those things like anywhere in our system, right? In the subconscious. So when times like this, when we reach and we feel like we're at our max, these emotions come forward in a way that we may not know how to respond to. We may respond in panic, we respond in anger, we respond in all varying degrees because we don't know what to do with that energy, that voice, with that breath. And so in all of that, in times that we are in now, I want to invite everyone to meet you where you are in your emotion. Meet you there, acknowledge it, have the awareness like in your core of who you are. That this energy that we have, the soul that we have, the being that we have, has many layers to it. We all have wounds, we all have traumas at varying degrees. And so in that, how do we take care of ourselves, as Lanee was speaking to? That we're taking care of ourselves so we can hold ourselves, know what our emotions are, know what we're feeling, so we can then hold space for others and go in our communities. It gives us the greater capacity to hold space for others when we can hold the space for ourselves first. It's a way of self-care. It's honoring ourselves and where we are in the anger, in the pain, in the rage, in all of it. So I really want to uplift that, we all have the spectrum of emotions, and the love and care and the honor of those are so important right now. And that we're honoring that as we are honoring the people around us in their emotions as well. What can we do with those emotions when they come up? When we are so used to stuffing, when we are so used to like, hold it down, hold it back, I'm going to reserve this for later, right? In those times, what can we do? Like Adelina spoke to, Lanee spoke to, we can use our breath. I can breathe very strongly. If we have to have a powerful breath, we have a powerful breath. We see children around us, right, at young ages, that we can see them go from one emotional state to another like that. When did we stop and learn that that was not okay? They can move it through their system so quickly, right? They can move it. But as we have grown, we've learned how to hold it back. It's not the appropriate time. I'm going to deal with this later. So how do we honor those? What kind of tools can we use? Creativity. We could put our bare feet onto the ground in the grass, connect to Mother Nature. We can go to our own roots, our own wisdom. We can go to our inner child. What do I need right now? What does she or him, what do they need right now? Because that voice wants to be heard. That voice needs to express. What can I do to support that part of self? Do I need to primal scream into a pillow? Do I need to punch a pillow? Do I need to push-ups? Do I need to chant? Do I need prayer in this moment? What can I do to honor where I am and truly feel my truth so I can hold space in my community, so I can hold space for others in my family and my brothers and sisters around me? I really wanted to uplift that because as I've gone through my journey of suppression and what stigma could do and what healing tools I became a fierce seeker for, because I knew coming from a culture in a little village in a very strict suppressive culture, and how there continued to be a suppressed indigenous culture, bringing that information here in this culture, in what I'm marinating in. I had to honor what I'm marinating in now, what I marinated in as a child and throughout my life, and know that all of those parts are what brought me here. That beautiful tapestry that's been weaving this whole time are medicine, and the good, bad, and the ugly, and the terrified fear. That I'm able to turn that into medicine, not only for myself, for my others in my community, and finding my truth in that. Oscar, if we can put up that one slide, the first one. There's a slide, an image of a piece of work that I created around the healing process. I did a whole series called Bound, because I was bound by my emotions. I was bound by my home. I was bound by my own mind. I didn't know what to do. So I created a whole series of work around this, and literally sewn string around pieces of me. These were actually kind of this, like 7 inner critics of myself, the things that I was saying to myself that were not in the most pleasant ways to talk to myself. And so we can go into the next slide, please. What I came to myself to learn, I created these 3 pieces: connect, respect, and compassion. I was going to connect to myself and my emotions, allow myself to connect to others. I was going to respect myself, my emotions, and others. And I was going to have compassion for myself, for my emotions, and others. And I decided that moment that I would not be bound by my emotions, but be transformed by them. And so with all of this, I want to share an exercise that I found to be so powerful. And if we're able to put that into the chat, there's 4 lines, very simple. This is called the Oponopono prayer. And maybe a lot of people already know about this prayer. It could be a mantra. It could be an intention. It could be a blessing. But what this prayer does, it's an ancient Hawaiian prayer of vibration in these words to open space in the heart space. In the heart space. It's a prayer of forgiveness. Now, by the words of forgiveness, it's not saying forgiveness of I'm letting people off the hook, or I'm forgiving in a certain kind of way that I'm not, that I'm saying what is right or wrong. The forgiveness is that I'm choosing to not be in bondage with my emotions around a certain thing, person, trauma.
One of the things that is really important for me to claim as an artist is that my training ground for my work actually began in my own Mexicana childhood home, with all of its traumas and with all of its beauty. I was really happy to hear Lanee speak to, and Andrea, right, that how trauma isn't necessarily what will kill us, but this address mental health. And one of the things that I want to offer up in addition to our breath work is the emotions that get stuck in our bodies, as Saori was talking about. It should not in any way surprise any of us that the collective energy in our movement, movimiento, that is what also is required of us individually. And sometimes we are working in situations where we're at the office and we cannot leave, but we can feel that anger rising in us because of macro aggressions happening all around. And what happens is that it does stay there. So what I love about the years of theater and teatrisa and acting work is that quite often those silly things that we associate with silly white musical actors, and we've passed them on campus, or we've, you know, those of us who have not gravitated towards that, and it's like, that's not for me. So much of theater training, actor training, actually comes from our traditions and our communities. So something that we do constantly when we're getting ready for performance or for teaching. I've been a teaching artist for 25 years now. Even if you're at your kind of relates to the cubbyhole exercise, but it's a little bit different. If you're at your desk, you may not be able to go full blown with this, but if you're at home, you definitely can. Is that when you identify where something is constricted or you feel tightness, like when I get angry, for example, I know that my throat tightens up because I just want to scream. And this is that my elder, Nancy has reminded me, this is that chakra blue area and the stones that we can use to protect ourselves. But I have also felt constriction around my chest. So an exercise that I've done with many of my students is to not only identify it, touch it, but to give it a name. And the beautiful thing about performance work, theater work, is that anything that is inside of you can actually be turned into character and expelled out. So I invite you right now, if your toe hurt, a name of, you're going to give it your ex's name because it's the same kind of pain you feel, or it's any name you want to give it. The next step in that is to allow that wound or that place where it's hurting, identify it with a color. So give it a color. So it has a name, it has a color. And then again, I always invite my adult students to allow children around them to see them play. Give it a sound. Because this is usually where, quote, non-actors stop and they're like, oh, I don't want to do improvising. I don't want to do that. But we can all give our pain a sound, right? And when I mean by sound, it could be like, shh. It could be, if it's my throat, it usually wants to be like, right? If it's on your hands have just had it from typing away. It could be the. But what I'm inviting you to do is to animate what is hurting you so that you can move it out. Because our movement is about movimiento, and it has to start with our body. And one of the beautiful things about allowing yourself to perform and to get into your body with just those basic things is that you are pushing it out, much in the same way that the breath is. Almost objectively, then artistically and creatively and holistically, you can begin to have a conversation with it. You can begin to give it words and let it talk back to you, and you can shape. And so I invite you all to play with these notions and these ideas. One of the things that I define for myself and to share with you all is what healing has meant for me over the years. And I know that in these times where, at least so, on the state violence that continues to be perpetuated on our Black communities and other communities of color. But healing for me, and I think for many of us, and where we come from is also connected to the personal violences that we experience. So I am able to sit here today and be here as whole as I am, and to injuries that have been perpetuated both in the personal sphere and the wider institutional one. And that for me is connected to this idea of that healing for me is the ability to walk with my wounds and not die bleeding to death. Because I do believe the medicine, I've been able to actually take those emotions that Saori was pointing to and that Lanee was talking about, how we repress, and go into the fire, so to speak. And that's not a new notion. One of my maestras for many years, Sheri Moraga, would talk about opening that wound up. And so there is so much medicine for us in our own histories. And I'm of two minds as an artist and a teaching artist. One is 90% of the art practice that I do is for myself, meaning that 90% of the writing or the improvised monologues never make it for the stage, nor are they intended for that. And I actually want to challenge every person on this Zoom and who will eventually be listening to come out of the artistic closet. Come out and claim your artist self, because the truth is some of the most amazing artist peers in my life were and are still organizers. When I have gone into a kindergarten classroom before the pandemic, I was doing some substitute teaching. I have lots of nieces and nephews, so I've gone to many kindergarten, elementary classrooms. And any child that you say, okay, it's time for music, all 29 of my students up on their feet, ready to sing. All right, time to draw. All 29 students up on their feet, ready to draw, fighting over the colors. It's time to, and they go, right? Somewhere between kinder and third grade, half that class already believes that they can't draw, they can't sing, they can't read aloud and perform. Us have creative capabilities because we are born as creative individuals. And I invite you as organizers to keep bringing the arts into our movements, because as Andrea, and all of a sudden she starts to recount that story. But the way she recounts it is by enacting our trauma and our challenges. And we were rolling that evening. Like, we're like, oh yeah, you were gonna cry because the dog is gonna bite your nalgas, and my brother and I. And so that memory has always stayed with me, because when we survive our traumas, we can actually come back to them in a very, with reflection, and we can turn them on their heads, right? And we can use the story to share with others, as opposed to it being a story of shame that we just keep inside. So Las Hociconas were important because, you know, they say, my mom saved my life in showing me that we can recount our stories by exaggerating them, by making them up and, you know, turning them around. And, you know, the performance has saved me from my own sense of wanting to commit suicide. I can say that now. 3 years ago, when I got more information about my pedophile grandfather, as opposed to going into this really deep depression, I knew I had gotten information that I needed to have for continued healing, and that I wasn't going to go, I was going to feel everything. And I did feel intense sadness, but I wasn't going to crash and burn. And I didn't leap into the desire of wanting to kill myself, because I had tools, and I knew that spirit was ready for me to hear this information. So this is the value of tools. And I think I'm sharing that so that we can remember, you know, what Andrea has said, that, you know, I too am of the school of Audre Lorde, and
different things. It can look like that trickster energy that Adelina was sharing, storytelling and humor. It can look like using personal practice, whether it's visual arts or journaling or breath work, to monitor your own, or self-witnessing, to monitor your own process of healing and grounding. It can look like a full-out creative process of making a work of art out of your own pain and trauma, hopefully in community and collaboration with other people. And it can look like cultural practice, practicing rituals from our ancestors that we've inherited, creating rituals in the way that we create family when we need them. It can look like so many things. And so it's important that we come out of the artistic closet, as Adelina said, to embrace all the possibilities of what creativity, cultural practice, and healing could look like. So with that, we're going to go ahead and open up to participants. I think you can share questions either in the chat or raise hands, and I'm going to turn it back to Oscar to moderate the Q&A section. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. And I know that earlier in the chat portion, I think Deborah had asked about two things, which was around, someone mentioned around burnout and maybe giving input around that. But Deborah specifically wrote a comment around what it means to be Black and an activist, and how that's a competing space in her psyche. And I don't know if any of the facilitators wanted to give input to any of that.
I want to ask Lanee first, because we haven't heard from Lanee in a little while. Do you want to address either of those?
Well, I appreciate Deborah for sharing that honest and authentic reality for her. I can't speak directly to activism. I can speak to advocacy, and that's one of the tenets of social work, is social justice. We can't separate ourselves from fighting for equity. But I can tell you, I can speak to competing interests of being Black and being a clinician, or being Black and being someone who's tasked with fighting for social justice, because there are moments where, as a human being, you cannot help but live the deep-seated emotion that you are connected to this cause. But I am a mother of 2 Black men, and I cannot always separate my clinical work from who I am as a mother. And so I definitely have moments where the lines blur. I've learned to accept, and I've learned to celebrate that. I've learned to acknowledge that that is a sign of my humanity. Because I think at one point in our profession, we were expected to maintain boundaries and separate things so that our personal life would not bleed into. So I can't speak directly to her experience, but I can appreciate what she's sharing with us. And I just can't imagine what she may face at times when she is out fighting for the cause and leading and having to manage or grapple with her own individual experiences and experiences of being a Black American. The trauma starts before birth. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much for giving input. And I don't know if the other panelists wanted to ask, but I wanted to give more input. But for everybody here, if you feel free to either write something in the chat if you don't want to ask personally, or you can just unmute yourself and then ask it into the space. We'll be more than happy to give some more input or insight.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Has anybody on the call had a specific feeling that they haven't been able to grapple with, that they would like to share with the panel, that maybe we all communally feel right now in this moment of either the pandemic or how we are relating to the protests, how we feel about what's been happening from a personal level? I'm just curious.
I have a question, please.
Go ahead.
I have a question. My name is Innocent.
Mm-hmm.
regarding what she just asked, I feel like the protest has a lot to do with how um, our Black community is supposed to assist each other. But so many things has happened in the past that many Blacks don't have jobs, and we are not. Many of us don't have credible jobs that we can do something, and many of us really get rejected because when we apply for jobs, we don't get any opportunity, and it comes to where we have the mental and stress issue, and then we cannot know how we can handle, how we can feel because of employment pressure. And we know that as Blacks, I'm from Nigeria. I've gotten my education, I've got my bachelor's degree, I've had a social degrees, but it's hard to get a job in my field. I live in New York for 10 years or more, then before coming to Houston. I thought Houston was something better that I can find employment, but sometimes employment is difficult for somebody. That's why at the end, this type of section that you are coordinating helps me to seek deep inside to find better solutions on where I can reassess myself and look for solutions where I can get better opportunities somewhere that people can accept me, because it's very hard wherever I go. I have been rejected several jobs, but I'm still unemployed, but looking for employment to do something. It's been difficult for me. So that's the thing.
Thank you for sharing that. Do any of our panelists want to respond? Thank you so much for telling your story. If any, I'm asking if any of our panelists want to respond. I will offer that exactly what you said, the process of accepting yourself and finding your strengths and finding the practices that keep you grounded is going to help through hard times, no matter what those times are. Sometimes it's hard to be in a moment of crisis or challenge and remember the practices that make us feel strong and powerful and grounded and clear about our future and the direction that we want to go in. Sometimes it's it's difficult to see it when we're in it, right? But it's actually the moment that we need those self-care practices and creative practice and our own cultural practices the most to give us support to keep going. And I know we have another question on Stack. I just want to ask if the panelists want to address what he said.
Can I just, I want to say thank you for what you addressed and what you're speaking to, because you know, I think it's also an opportunity for us to expand what we think is creative act. I know that for me right now also to be completely different, what has been both creative and connecting me to, well, how is this going to lead to community activism, is finally, my mom went to win Texas, you know, farmer, to come back to the possibility of just even gardening, right? But we don't garden the way folks do for, oh, it's aesthetically beautiful. Like this idea of what it means, even if it means bringing a potted tomato plant into our home, right? That there's creativity in putting our hands in the land and to begin thinking about how we're going to restructure. We can't go back to normal after this. And food co-ops have been around for a long time. Our community activists have been working on, you know, really have or wondering if there are people in your community who are already doing this, and if that is a place where you can also begin to make those connections, because there is some truth in actual grounding, right? And rethinking what art and creativity looks like, because pan-indigenous art was never separated. This whole compartmentalization of boundaries and what's personal, professional. I mean, we have to really also look at the way we've been commodified as peoples and how our traditions have been commodified. So, so I think that what your question brings up home is all just how do we have they're in the richest country in the world, and we know that is not the case for the majority of our communities. So I feel like I'm not in Houston, but I think Houston in Action probably has some great resources about, you know, just even providing access to, well, what's happening around our food resources locally.
Thank you, Adelina. We only have a minute left, and I know we have one more question. We have more resources to offer you all before the end of the call, and Oscar was going to tell you about next steps. Oscar, do we have time to take Soledad's question?
Yes, Soledad, if you want to ask it, then we can see what the panelists.
Yes, I have a question that maybe won't be able to be answered, which is fine. So we can take it home. But I think it's a very important question. I consider it very deep. I would like to know if someone has think about what is the origin and the impact of stigma in our communities. Because besides all the problems that we have, and we have them from everywhere, right? It could be race, it could be culture, it could be economical, it could be health, it could be mental health, everything. But besides that, I've personally seen that the worst struggle is a stigma, the worst limitation. We cannot look for help, we cannot find help, we cannot restore our own selves, or everything is much more difficult because of the stigma. But what is the origin of it? Is it the same everywhere in our communities, where we come from, where we live, where we are here? Because I think that if we get to explore the origin of stigma as we experience it, we will be able to approach the problem from a different side.
Does Saori or Lname want to respond to that quickly?
My first thought is that the origin of stigma in any community stems from fear and lack of understanding. And fear being a core emotion is something that we all experience. It's a commonality. Now, what we fear varies from person to person, and it also changes with enlightenment and understanding. So that's my thought on the origin of stigma. As far as how to address and how to make changes, well, that is a very heavy lift. And I think a lot of people in various ways do a great job of getting out to educate. My professional practice is also engaging with the community around us to educate on mental health issues, to dispel some of the myths and to decrease those fears and that stigma. That's my take. Thank you, though. Thank you very much for that question. It's a lot to think about.
Thank you.
I know that we're over time. I just want to know if Saori has any last words as we're moving toward closing, and then Oscar's going to share with us some resources and next steps.
Yeah, I'll just speak to that question too. I think that's a beautiful question to ask. And just voicing it is allowing the open conversation. So can we breathe into that question? Can we be with that question in communities and allow the unraveling and the thoughts and feelings to come through that? So we're engaging and empowering each other around that and coming to our own wisdom and bringing that guidance forward. So I think that's a beautiful question. Thank you for bringing that forward.
I would just also add, kind of like coming out of the closet. You know, we have to come out of the closet so many times in so many ways in our lives, and around mental health is one of them. And when we do that, when we reach the point in our own lives when we have the courage to speak openly about it, it helps other people in our families and communities speak openly about it too. And so modeling that leadership is also something that can really help break the taboo of talking about it. Oscar, you want to lead us through closing? Thank you,
Yes.
everyone.
Yeah, thank you everyone for participating. I have some recommendations from the panelists too of different resources that are available to you. I'll be adding some of these in the chat box, but if you want to get more input on some of the work and be able to connect with the work that our amazing panelists are doing, feel free to look into this slide. I'm adding it right now into the chat, all the link information. Let me see. Oops. As they have some recommendations as well for books and things that you can read, which we'll cover in a bit. Here we go. I added all this in the chat portion if you want to take a look at it or get more inputted information. Art2Action is from Andrea Assaf. So you can get more input about how we work together and collaborate Art2Action. And then there's some links for downloads through the Story Toolkit and the prayer that was brought up also today. And here are a couple of books as well that are recommended. I've actually, through a lot of personal stuff that I've gone through, I've actually been able to read The Body Keeps the Score, which is the first book on here. It's a very long book. I'm not much of a reader, but one second. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not much of a reader, but I do end up going to audiobooks all the time. So I'll add these resources as well in the chat portion, so y'all have access to them and you're able to see recommendations for this. Whoops, 1 second. It kind of took me out of the share screen. But I do appreciate everyone for spending your afternoon with us. Know that you can reach out to any one of us, the panelists. We have the emails here, and I'll ask the panelists if you want to put your website or your email. So if people want to reach out to you to see how we can continue to doing the work, they can reach out to you there. And I'm adding the books. Sorry, I've been trying to do the whole thing of adding all the content and moving things as there's a couple of glitches on this, but my name is Oscar Hernandez. I'm a community organizer with Houston in Action, and I thank all of you for joining us today. Our next steps for this is if you go to our website at houstinaction.org, you will be able to see all the training that we have upcoming around not only healing activism, but we would like to also move forward in our organizing and the work that we're doing around census and civic engagement.